Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Campus Consortium EdTalk webinar series on technology bias and inclusion in education, remove barriers to equitable digital learning. If you have any questions now or during today's presentation, please type them into the chat box or questions pane in the Zoom control panel. Without further ado, I would like to pass the platform to Dr. Carl Horvath, President at Campus Consortium.
Thank you, David. Uh, it's great to be here, and thank you for everyone who's attended today. And I thank our panelists in advance because we have a great lineup of panelists that will contribute to the conversation. And this is going to be a very interesting exchange, I think. And we're going to ask for our attendees to participate in the conversation too through a series of poll questions. First off, I'd like to just give a shout out to who's here so you can get perspective on the audience for everyone. And that is, we have over 250 attendees for today's webinar. It's a great turnout, and it's probably because it's such an important topic. And we have people from all over the country, from over 150 institutions across the country and a few outside of the country, actually. We have Rutgers University, just to call out a few, New Jersey Institute of Technology. We have Seattle University, Kent State University, University of Pittsburgh, St. Charles Community College. We have Oregon State University, North Dakota State University, California State University, Sacramento, Wake Forest University. We have Montana State University Library. I hope Yellowstone is doing better these days since the recent flooding. We have Penn State University, UC Berkeley, Oregon Education Association. We have University of Illinois, Yale University. We have Texas A&M. We have National Technical Institute for the Deaf at RIT. We have University of Vermont. We have California State, University of Maryland, and Indiana University, DeVry, Samford, and University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. I mean, the list is amazing for the turnout for today. We also have Villanova University, and we have a regular attendee that I have to give a shout out to Richard Wack. Thank you for joining yet another one of our EdTalk webinars. We also have University of Pennsylvania, Ohio University, and we even have some EdTech vendors such as Dell Computer with us today. So, and we have universities outside of the US in Canada. So welcome to our presentation. We hope that you get something out of it. Folks over at the University of Toronto, thank you for tuning in, and we hope this will be beneficial. Anyway, I'm going to move on to making introductions here so we can get started. First, our panel consists of Michael Tapscott, who's the Director of Multicultural Student Services at George Washington University, Dr. Lisa Stevens, who's the Assistant Dean of Online Education at University of Buffalo and does a few other things, and also Dr. Rochelle Newton, who's a diversity consultant and thought leader in the area of DEI, and also has served as a Duke University Chief Operating Officer. A little bit about Campus Consortium. First of all, I'm Carl. I'm the president of Campus Consortium. So welcome to everybody. And we do these EdTalk webinars once a month. And usually it's around topics that are important to education, both higher education and K-12. Campus Consortium has been around since 2003. Really has evolved over the years, but the mission has stayed the same, which is to help education with access to technology, affordability of technology, and expertise in technology. And that's been our driving mission. And whatever we do, we try to help all education institutions with technology. These are just some of the services we offer. If you can go to campusconsortium.org, you'll see there's probably something for everybody, including consortium pricing, peer collaboration and networking, news and events. And of course, we offer a few free services as well. And of course, talk about topics of innovation and trends in education technology. Today's presentations, technology bias and inclusion in education, remove barriers to equitable digital learning. This is just a few of our pro bono services you can see on our website, but this is a service that we do provide with the support of some education DEI experts that can come in and look at the technology from a DEI perspective. Many institutions have been hiring diversity officers and implementing diversity programs, but when we think about institutions, colleges, universities, and school districts that have implemented technology up to sometimes 30 years ago, not some of these technologies have not been addressed to make sure that students, parents, faculty, staff, and other stakeholders can access them. And so this is a service that we are able to offer that comes in and really makes an assessment of that environment for you, so you can take care of priorities and also implement best practices. Today's presentation is possible due to our vendor partners, our vendor partner sponsors, and here's just a sample. We have many more, and many of them offer special pricing because they're through the Campus Consortium. So if you need any services, products, or licensing, just contact us and we'll help you. We also have a great network of nonprofit collaborators we work with, so we can really extend our resources beyond what we can do. And so we work with many others in the nonprofit community. Consider Campus Consortium membership. These are just some of the great benefits that you can get through that, but also access to all the things I just recently talked about. Also want to thank our guest institutions who are participating in today's EdTalk webinar, the George Washington University, University of Buffalo State University in New York, and Duke University. I'd like to get started with just a few definitions to set the stage. And typically what I do on these webinars is kind of give you a brief introduction to the topic about what we're talking about. And then our guest panelists really dive into their expertise and their experience around these areas. I think many of us have heard about the federal government technology accessibility rules and laws that are out there. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act has been around for a long time, for decades, and it's one that many are familiar with. If an institution has received a letter, sometimes from a law firm, saying your library website is not compliant for disabled people, then they engage IT and consultants in the task of ensuring compliance for their library website, but then that extends to their public website and other resources they have on campus. Since then, many applications provide web accessibility compliance when creating websites. And a lot of times when you go to vendors, their websites are also compliant for Section 508. Now, this is a rule for federal government websites. They must comply with this. That doesn't apply to everybody, but educational institutions in particular are very aware of this rule and really try to take it to heart to make sure their resources are most available to everyone that comes to visit them. But let's talk a little bit about DEI. We hear that term, it's trending today. There's a lot of discussion, but this is an age-old discussion. It's been around for a long time. We haven't always paid the attention to it that we should. And certainly, even in the technology area, we have not. And so DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's mostly been training, as I said, diversity officers, but we're really looking at it from a technology perspective today. And then there's a lot of attention that we can pay to making sure our applications and technology is accessible. Um, so I'm going to start out with the first interactive part of our presentation. And I ask the audience, the attendees, to please participate in our first poll question today. And this is going to be so we have a two-way conversation. We'd love to get information from you about your perspective on what's going on at your institution. And certainly as a follow-up, we can continue the conversation after this presentation. So the poll question, the first one is, do all students have equitable access to your institution's technology to participate in online learning and digital student services? So the first response could be no, not really. We haven't particularly worked on that yet, or I'm not sure, because it's really not something that we talk about. We do talk about it face to face, but not necessarily in a digital context. Or yes, we surveyed students and ensured they had computers, internet training, and that our applications are compliant. So if the audience could please, participate in that poll, we would love to see your responses. I'm going to move on to our next slide. And just want to kind of give you a very quick tour of DEI. This is a poll that was implemented by EdWeek Research Survey Center early this year. And the question was, how concerned are you about potential for race bias in the education technology used in instruction? So very concerned, somewhat concerned, and very unconcerned. The results show responses from teachers, principals, and district leaders. Now, this is in the more in the K-12 area, but it kind of gives us a picture of what the lay of the land is in terms of the K-12 sector. And 10% is very concerned. And then we have another 34% that's somewhat concerned. So concern means something's got to be done, whether it's somewhat or very. And believe it or not, there's about 28% that are somewhat unconcerned. But the issue is that K-12, like higher ed, has had to make that pivot to using technology and embracing the digital culture and what they do. And that is not necessarily going away, as we'll hear probably from some of our speakers. I'd like to kind of give you the results of that recent poll we just shared. Do all students have equitable access to your institution's technology to participate in online learning and digital student services? And 27% of our attendees said no. Not since the pandemic. Many students have been negatively affected. 44% are kind of in the middle, not sure, we need to investigate. But a great 28% says, yes, we've been working on this and paying attention to it. So, really distributed across the different types of institutions and what they've done. And I really appreciate everybody contributing to that poll question. Back to digital DEI in the news, we see research, books, and news about diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to technology. There's a number of research studies, and at the end of this PowerPoint, I have a number of, I have a reference section, APA format, that kind of shows some of the research we did into putting this presentation together. Racist Everyday Technologies, Intervening Bias and Prejudice, from the Kellogg Center in Princeton. There's a book, and I can't talk about this book enough, and I've mentioned it before in some presentations, by Ruha Benjamin, Race After Technology. This is a book about racism that's kind of built into the technology and how we can overcome that. And then news, who's making sure the AI machines aren't racist? This is a New York Times article, and there's many more articles out there today. Also, if you go, you're a fan of TED Talks, there's many DEI and technology related TED Talks available. So I would encourage you to go there and listen to some of these very engaging speakers. Here's just a sampling of these, and we will share this PowerPoint deck with all the attendees after this presentation, so you can follow up and listen to some of these speakers. And then, basically we're designing tech for student subpopulations. We're not really doing that. We should be. We're generally kind of designing technology for the overall student, but we're not necessarily addressing students that don't have access to internet, that don't have a computer, that also the interfaces of our LMS are not designed for all populations of races and genders. So there are key items that we really need to look at our technology to make sure they are compliant. So we also are looking at what areas of our institutions does digital DEI affect? Well, recruitment, retention, academic support, student engagement, and student support. These are all areas of that can be affected by digital DEI. And by attending to DEI, we can raise the participation and the outcomes of the investment of all our efforts into these areas. Next poll questions before we go to our first panelist is, do you have a process to assist equitable online digital teaching and learning? So in terms of academics and engaging your students, no, we focus on the basics, or somewhat. We don't have resources really to fix our legacy systems, but we do introduce new tech when possible. And then yes, since the pandemic, we ensure all students equitably access technology. So if the attendees would please participate in this poll, I will begin to introduce our first speaker, Michael Tapscott. Diversity and multicultural advocate Michael Tapscott has a long history of experience and success in the education sector, having trained at Tufts University and serving long tenures of supporting students at George Mason University and Regent University. He currently serves at the George Washington University as Director of Multicultural Student Services. Michael's responsible for strengthening student development, community development, and campus climate through diversity training, academic support, retention work, student organization support, student leadership development, intergroup interactions through working with a multicultural community with a focus on minority, LGBT, interfaith, and religious life communities. And Michael, welcome to our EdTalk today. And I would like to hand it over to you to get your perspectives on technology and DEI.
I think obviously DE&I is something we all have to pay attention to. And I think the most important thing is to recognize that technology is a challenge for everyone. It goes without saying, we're all learning and we're all growing in that capacity. But the most important thing I think we all need to be mindful of is that every one of those challenges is magnified for underrepresented communities or underrepresented identities. It's as if we build things without the participation of many of the end users. And oftentimes the policy and the technologies that we build make sense, but the communities that build them or the folks involved in developing them don't reflect the diversity of the people or the diversity of who's going to be using or who the product is going to be serving. So it's a big picture issue of the highest sense, because if your technology isn't working, for me, and this is going to sound odd for a student life guy, but it all goes back to giving rate for me. If we treat every single student as well as we possibly can, we'll have a higher percentage rate of giving rate and return from that interaction. And for those who've been around enrollment management, the whole notion of the cradle to grave model of enrollment, it makes sense in that if we take care of people before they enroll, they're more likely to connect. And if we take care of them while they're enrolled, they're more likely to stay. If we take care of them at graduation, they're more likely to engage with alumni. If we take care of them as alumni, they're more likely to engage our development office to give back. If we don't take care of each and every aspect of the experience while we've got them connected, we'll end up with giving rates that don't reflect our goals. We know that many schools, the Ivies, do a wonderful job in terms of understanding what it takes to encourage people to give back. And again, the reason why I say this is that technology touches all of our students throughout their experience. And we have to think about ensuring that every aspect of that touch has that end goal in mind in terms of folks giving back. HBCUs do this in a wonderful way. I've always been mindful, having worked at predominantly white institutions for a lot of my career, that the folks I know in HBCUs have a really great sense of how to shape a student experience that contributes to long-term giving and giving rates. And the other things that go with giving rates are higher graduation rates, long-term connections to the institution, and poor performing institutions end up having students with higher loan balances, lower repay rates, and related. And these are things we'd like to, obviously reduce. The other part about, what I think is really important is ensuring that the classroom experience also connects to that sense of everybody's inclusive, everybody's welcomed. Our policy and our approach to the classroom is consistent. There's so many places where we can do a better job simply framing the classroom experience with DE&I in mind. A simple thing in terms of pronouncing a student's name well is an amazing thing from a diversity perspective. But oftentimes we tend to struggle with difficult names and we dismiss the importance of that. But that sets the tone. I'm not saying that these are microaggressions we need to worry about, but imagine what it sounds like when someone pronounces your name with the right tonation and the right feel. We always encourage folks to get to know students as personally as possible. But then I've thought about the idea of developing a software that would collect our data with a phonetic pronunciation, a place where a student can enter a phonetic pronunciation or phonetic spelling of their name to aid the university, staff, and administration, and faculty. If anybody runs with that idea, I'll take 10%. But I think that could be a great way of sort of changing the tone around simple things like name and using data. The other thing that I'd like to mention that I think a lot of people struggle with, and I know I have a lot of arguments with faculty here, is the notion of academic freedom. So how does that impact technology? It all goes back again to the quality of the student experience and the hope that people will want to give back when they graduate. Academic freedom is not law, it's an ideology. It was developed back in the 40s by the American Association of University Faculty. I am fairly certain that that was not a diverse group that defined the range of what academic freedom is, but it shows up often in a really unique way in institutions, particularly in the modern age, as we're all mindful of diversity and equity and inclusion. The use of the N word, the R word, and the F word in the context of the curriculum is allowed. And I understand that academic freedom supports that, and I would never want to tell a faculty member that they couldn't express themselves in terms of the reading and the curriculum. But the reality is that every student has feelings. And if we don't understand the impact of the use of those terms, and again, what they are, the N word is the slur used against Black folks, the R word is the slur used against Native American folk, and the F word is the slur used against LGBTQ folk. And so while we may say that academic freedom and the expression of legitimacy of the curriculum is expressed by reading these terms, not necessarily using these terms, but reading these terms or however else it shows up, it has an impact on how that student feels. And the old Maya Angelou quote comes into mind. People forget what you said, people forget what you did, but they never forget how you made them feel. So if the bottom line of the institution is still tied to those feelings and that sense of the campus and college experience, we have to be more mindful about the impact of things like academic freedom on the language we use. Bottom line is it's also a matter of social justice nowadays, and universities are developing guidelines, ways to manage when these things occur. First experiences around D&I, every student needs to feel welcomed and affirmed. Everybody in an institution has to maximize the ability of their technologies to connect with young people, again, with the long-term bottom line that people will end up giving back. We've all got experiences in our own undergraduate institutions that define how we feel about it and whether or not we give back. I loved my institution. I gave back as soon as I could. Not a lot. I'm not a rich man. Higher ed does that for us. But the reality is that I felt that the balance of the experience was, even for a young Black man in Boston in the 70s during the busing and segregation era there, my institution took great care of us and protected us. And that's what drove my longstanding connection to them. Again, not necessarily a technology thing, but we can't expand what we do technologically if we don't expand how our students give back to our institution and contribute. In terms of meeting needs of the LGBTQ students, there's lots of technologies we can apply to ensure that dead names are eliminated from records so they don't come back up. Again, that addresses how students feel, but the technology can strengthen that. We can all do a better job in terms of preferred name and how we utilize that information either in the classroom or supporting students throughout campus life. There's nothing more, again, working with the trans students we have here, there's nothing more painful than to be treated like a second-class citizen in the general action of how we do our business each day. And so I think, again, mindfulness around how we do and how we access technology. With our disabled students here, again, it's a matter of mindfulness. We recently had a situation where a faculty member not only challenged a student regarding their disability, but then announced that they had a disability in class while arguing about the validity of a service dog. These are things that just drag us backwards in terms of how we're trying to frame a student experience that everyone will benefit from. And so I just always encourage all of us, we've got to continue to learn and grow. If you don't know the 23 aspects of sexual identity or gender, you've got to know that. Students' vocabularies are very complex around these things. Students are allies and students are part of the LGBT community as well. So we all have to be mindful. We have to grow. Faculty and staff, we have to make sure we maintain what I call our techno credibility. If you don't know how to work the Zoom, the finer aspects of the Zoom meeting, you've got to learn, you've got to study, and you've got to push yourself to get better at it, because that credibility also adds up to the end of the day. So these are some of the issues we've been thinking about. You think, does this really tie into technology? I believe it does, because you can use technology to better serve and better support our students if we're thoughtful about the way we do it.
Michael, right on. I think all that, what you said, all those experiences, all those stories directly tie into technology. Technology is pervasive. It's everywhere today. We can't imagine doing anything, whether it's working, shopping, getting healthcare, banking, financials, it's all related to technology. So what are those interfaces like, and who are they excluding or offending? That's something that I don't know if we are really looking at that when we are designing these technologies. One thing you mentioned about, you had mentioned justice, Michael. I just wanted to, bring up a comment from an attendee who said, this is Karine Olom. And Karine says, curious whether you have considered the acronym JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion in lieu of DEI. I had to take an important call just as the session began, so I think they had to drop off. But any input on that acronym?
Actually, I rather like it. It's like the force of
yes,
diversity, inclusion. I think justice is becoming a more critical piece of the conversation. Equity has sort of joined the conversation. Acronyms are important, words are important. I think it's something to consider. Maybe something we'll start to have some conversation around. But I think social justice is growing in terms of how higher ed is going to be impacted. One of the things that we're hearing a lot now is the use of transcripts. There's new terminology around transcripts. I can't remember the term. Transcripts as hostage transcripts. So, for example, for the institutions that charge a fee or won't provide a transcript for a student that owes the institution money or what have you, there's a social justice aspect of that, because oftentimes it's skewed towards students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, which then, you have to look at students who are racially disadvantaged. So those aspects of social justice have social justice implications as well, and we've got to be mindful.
Great. That's good feedback. And Karine just said, still here. Yeah, I'm glad you were able to hear Michael's response. And then just as an aside, Scott Greenia said, or dice. And that's all Scott wrote, but I'm sure we can, kind of dive into that a little bit later. I'm curious what that's about. And Scott, if you could elaborate on that a little bit, I'd love to bring that up a little bit later in the presentation. Michael, thank you so much. Appreciate your contributions there. I want to share the results of our last poll. Do you have a process to assess equitable online digital teaching and learning? 16% of our responses said no, we focus on pedagogy. 53% said somewhat. So, about half the group they're trying. And then 31% are saying yes, since the pandemic, we ensure all students have access and accessibility to technology. So thank you for contributing to that. And I'm going to follow that up with one more poll question. Does your institution's strategic plan include plans to ensure equitable digital access for all students? So this is more a broader question rather than the specific teaching and learning. So if we think about DEI on campus, think about student services and every way that a student can interact with anyone on campus. So appreciate if you could answer no somewhat or yes on this current poll. All right, so let's move immediately to Dr. Stevens. Welcome. And by the way, Michael and Lisa are, in fact, everybody on today's panel is a former panelist in one of our education oriented EdTalk webinars. So thank you for coming back and sharing your expertise. Lisa served as Assistant Dean at the University at Buffalo's School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, leading online education, and serves as Senior Strategist for Academic Innovation in the Office of the SUNY Provost. She enjoys an appointment in the University at Buffalo Department of Communications as an adjunct associate professor. And Lisa leads strategic development of online programs within the school, promoting interdisciplinary opportunities, and leads coordination of program delivery. And her SUNY portfolio includes leadership of FlexSpace, Flexible Learning Environments Exchange, a global open education repository of learning environment exemplars now adopted by 1,400 institutions across 76 countries. Dr. Stevens, thanks for joining us today, and take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Carl. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I enjoyed chatting with Michael as we were getting warmed up. And I offer 3 guiding questions with respect to built learning environments. The first is around, how do we even consider inclusive learning environments? What about built environments? What are the elements that need to be potentially included in a classroom, which obviously is going to vary quite a bit depending on the curriculum, et cetera. And are there any resources out there currently to guide those DEI efforts inside built learning environments? And is there a process to guide any of these enterprise efforts, or even at the departmental level? So I would suggest that I can provide some answers to that. And do I have control to advance the slides here, Carl? Thank you. So when you consider what's going on within an institution, really your key stakeholders boil down to 3 groups. Almost anybody inside of a university is going to fit into one of these buckets. And obviously that's the pedagogy, all the people that are supporting the teaching and learning, the space, all the architects and facilities designers, as well as any internal or external contractors or planners. And then the audio, video, and technology integration, the IT components that are part of any built space. Next, please. So the idea to capture the integration of those three big buckets in the Venn diagram is to consider an approach that's more of an integrated planning approach. And SCUP, the Society for College and University Planners, it has wonderful workshops around all of this. But I love their definition about what is a sustainable approach to planning that builds relationships. And I love that that comes first, aligns the organization, and emphasizes preparedness for change. So iterative improvement, if you will. And there's also the nice caveat that there's no single right way to do this. That said, next slide, please. I would offer two freely available tools to our community to consider using. The first is the Learning Space Rating System, which is very much a quantified approach toward looking and assessing spaces at any given level. It can be a cluster of classrooms, it can be a department or a school, or across the entire campus enterprise. But the idea is that you can use this scoring system to help benchmark your own spaces and hopefully align some investment and look at strategic investment as a priority in different spaces. Now, FlexSpace, on the other hand, is a global repository which enables people to go into that. Once you have an account, allows you to go in and look at all types of spaces through using different filtering mechanisms. You can choose the type of space you want to look at, be it a lecture hall, esports environment, a STEM lab. But you can go through and take a look at all the exemplars. We would encourage everyone to get an account, of course, and upload their examples from their campus. And the idea is also that you can use kind of a Pinterest type of feature inside FlexSpace. You can set up a private idea board and then work within your institution with a group of experts or a group of advisors and use FlexSpace to pull in examples that you feel meet the criteria that you're developing within your institution. Also, I'm very jazzed that we have over 6,000 users now across 1,400 plus unique institutions from, golly, 76 or 78 different countries now. So it's growing nicely. Next slide, please. So to start this integrated process that I'm going to suggest to you, you can get an account in FlexSpace. If you have a .edu account, it'll just pass right through. Go to flexspace.org and you can find the Learning Space Rating System. The guiding criteria book, as well as the score sheets, are inside FlexSpace. And all of this was developed by a group of architects and planners and people that are very concerned about space at institutions across the country. They adapted it from the LEED environmental credit system. So we've all gone into buildings that have LEED Platinum, LEED Gold, that type of ranking. What's nice is Learning Space Rating System, like FlexSpace, has gone through a few iterations, and the most recent iteration includes some starter points for measures of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's go to the next slide. And this is a quick overview of what's included in the most recent version of the Learning Space Rating System. If you're like me, you'll look at that term biophilia and say, what the heck is biophilia? And it is very much the science of how we relate with living things, living beings interrelate with other living beings. And where that comes into play with space and environments is, can you see the outdoors? Can you engage with other living things easily? So kind of a cool thing to consider. Section 6 is also looking at immersive technologies now, and Section 7 of the LSRS is looking at more specific measures for inclusion. Next slide, please. To drill into this a little bit, if you look at the space exemplar here, essentially physical inclusion and universal design is probably what we're all most familiar with. Can students move around tables easily? Is anyone with any type of mobility issue restricted from engaging in the material that's being presented or discussed? And of course, you want to have height adjusted tables for anyone who may be in a chair or needs to have a specific height to facilitate any particular mobility issue. Next slide, please. Cognitive inclusion is a little more interesting. This is something that I think we're all learning about, how we can be more inclusive to people that may be on the spectrum of some type, the autism spectrum. So notice the room on the left has a sound booth. And the principle there is that if someone needs some quiet time, they can go into this booth and refocus their attention, be in a quieter, settled space. The second image in the middle there, of course, addresses the ability, again, to move furniture around. And then the third space is, the third image is about soft furniture, that many students are more comfortable when they can move furniture around, have tactile interaction with the furniture, and that it have nice, a nice feel when they're interacting with it. Next slide, please. The cultural inclusion, interestingly, I was just invited to the UK last week to speak about FlexSpace and the learning space rating system. And it's interesting how different cultures have different interpretations of what is cultural inclusion. Obviously, the United States has a very different history than, say, Europe. And where we settled out was you just want to have a space that doesn't raise the ire of any particular group or feel offensive to anyone that's going to be engaging with others inside the space. So let's go to the next slide. So I had already mentioned that there is a solution for looking at an inclusive process, an integrated process. You can start by going to the public website for flexspace.org, get yourself an account. Next slide, please. And what we recommend is called the FLIP, the FlexSpace Integrated Planning Process. So the idea here is to start with the learning space rating system. And it doesn't necessarily need to be full-time staff, but you need to have a group of people that are trained and familiar with the criteria to go about the business of ranking various spaces. You want to have good inter-rater reliability when that team is going about assessing different spaces. Next slide, please. So just to help with a simulation, I'm going to quickly run through an example. Utterly made this up, but we decided that the scope of the project, and it's important to have a scope, is these 3 buildings on the upper part of this campus map. And we're going to pretend for the sake of the simulation that this building B that we're focusing on has 3 different stories with 3 different departments. You can go ahead to the next slide. And we're going to have our raters go through each floor logically, start with 101, 102, 103. You get the idea, put the basic function of the room, the size, the type of space, and using the learning space rating system, assess a score. Next slide, please. Then the key is when you're looking at prioritization of what might need investment, your leadership is going to be happy to have any data to work with. So you take all your scores from your different buildings and just rank them from top to bottom. And now you can see that maybe you want to consider updating space that's ranked a little bit lower on the LSRS. Next slide, please. But if you can include your registrar, now you're really in good shape because you can look at who has the programs that are really in demand. For example, in this scenario, we're assuming that the School of Education has a hot new program that a number of teachers need to access quickly. Therefore, we may want to be investing in some high flex spaces right inside STEM labs, or at least some way to bring teachers into the space where they can't travel to the campus. Next slide, please. So obviously, if you can now approach an advisory board, and your mileage may vary, but this is typical of the type of roles that may be around a table addressing how are we going to invest in some of these new spaces. But you gather that group of advisors, now you're starting with some data. You're starting with something that's data-driven through the LSRS. And certainly there's likely to be differences in curricular perspective. So if you can give everybody around the table a FlexSpace account, next slide, please, magic starts to happen. Because when everyone's turned loose into FlexSpace and they look through the lens of their curricular expertise, they can say, that's a room that would work well with my students. Or a physician may say, that's a space that would work well with my students, or an engineering professor. And we've received anecdotal stories from people saying, it's really wild. You get in and you feel a little bit competitive with your colleagues and want to advocate for a space, a particular type of space. And suddenly we start talking about what we can do with each other and how we can accomplish that with our students. And a lot of that competitiveness just kind of settles down and you begin to focus on all the pedagogical priorities. Next slide, please. Oops, I'm sorry. I forgot that I didn't put one in after that. So to close out with this concept in general, I would again encourage everyone to get an account, and please submit all of your spaces, because this is all about educators helping other educators. This is only going to be a service as good as we make it. It's very much in line with Carl's Campus Consortium. It's a consortium. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have tremendous support from partners like ISTE and EDUCAUSE and CCUMC and Campus Consortium. And it is all held together primarily through both sponsorship from vendors and manufacturers, and also various schools. Our latest partner to jump in is Drexel. But we also have community colleges well represented through Foothill De Anza, and SUNY and the Cal State University system are very active in that, as well as Penn State. And golly, you know, it's so much easier to go and make a case to investors when you say campuses and systems have already supported this. So again, Carl, thank you so much for the invitation today.
No,
Happy to respond to any questions.
No, thank you. I love the, you analytical approach to this, which is very valuable and understood by a lot of people at all levels. So this really helps, you kind of have that figurative and graphic look, and then you interpret this into data, and it's helpful in making the case and really supports that. So I think in strategic plans, and especially when we are talking about really developing out DEI or JEDI plans in our institutions, that this is going to be definitely a big help. So thank you for that. And I think you and I need to talk more about this later, because I know a number of institutions would be interested in this program. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I just wanted to share quickly with everyone the last poll. Does your institution's strategic plan include plans to ensure equitable digital access for all students? About 20% said no, we're focusing on other important priorities, which is understandable in this day of tight budgets and not enough staffing and employees. And then about 56% said somewhat, we're slowly incorporating best practices the best we can for tech DEI awareness. And then 25% said, yes, we're ahead of the curve. We've got this. So very interesting feedback. It really shows that, everyone's trying, but, we really need to help the folks that need a little bit more assistance. Also, it looks like Michael's been answering a few questions. Thank you for that. And it looks like Scott also shared a link. Scott Greenia. Scott, did you share that with everyone? If not, we will certainly do that to describe what he had mentioned before about DICE, D-I-C-E. Thank you, Scott, I appreciate that. But I'd like to move on to the next and last poll question. This one's taking a little bit different direction. It's really about nonprofit compensation in a way. So we talk about systems, we talk about other aspects of technology, but do you think there is compensation bias? That means less pay for similar work in nonprofit education as compared to the same or similar executive and staff jobs in the for-profit sector. Do you think that there's an intentional less pay because you're in education or you're in a nonprofit doing social good? So you're mission based, so you should get less pay, even though you may be a key person for IT security, protecting data. Why should that position make less than somebody working in a for-profit or a corporate environment? Do you think that there is a bias toward that? And does that affect the type of employees educational institutions and nonprofits can hire? So the answers would be yes. Many executives and essential employees make less than industry standard. It's hard to find new employees. And then somewhat, we have a hard time keeping executives and staff because of turnover. And then no, it seems our compensation structure is adequate for employees, and retention is due to education culture. So if the audience could please participate in this final poll, we'll share that as soon as we're done. Next up, we have Dr. Rochelle Newton. And I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Newton in a few projects. Dr. Rochelle Newton has worked in information technology for more than 44 years. She has served as an advisor to stakeholders, strategic planner, cybersecurity subject matter expert, and team builder. With all her accomplishments, Dr. Newton's passion is in advocacy. She has committed herself to inclusion, specifically inclusion in IT. She has coached and mentored hundreds of people, but she says advocacy, skin in the game, delivers the best results. When you apply your social capital to help someone, the satisfaction is remarkable. That's inspirational. So thank you for that bio. And I also want to give a mention that you have a nonprofit organization that helps with education in regard to DEI. And before we hand it over to you, Dr. Newton, I would just like to share the results of this poll. Do you think there is compensation bias, less pay for similar work in nonprofit education compared to the same or similar executive and staff jobs in the for-profit sector? We have a resounding 71% of attendees that said, yes, there is. Many executive and essential employees make less than, for-profits for doing the exact same jobs. And it's 19%, almost 20% said somewhat. We have a hard time finding executives and staff because of turnover. And then 10% of institutions are doing a great job at taking care of their employees, faculty, and staff. No, it seems our compensation structure is adequate for employees and retention due to education culture. So thank you so much, everyone, for responding to these poll questions. We will share them out with everybody. But without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to Dr. Newton. And I know
I don't think there is enough time for me. Hear me?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I don't think there's enough time for me to cover what I put in my topic bullets, but I will say a few things about what some of the other panelists have said. So I agree with Michael completely. So I am a product. I have 3 degrees from a historically Black college and 1 from a predominantly white college. My experience at the predominantly Black college was 100% better than anything I experienced at the predominantly white college. In fact, I believe it so much that I send money every month to my North Carolina Central University, and I send not a penny to my predominantly white because it scarred me so much the entire experience being there. And I think if you really are interested in making education and specifically technology and education better for Black and brown people, you will think about them from their lens and not yours. So in the spectrum of what IT is, we design IT to serve the purpose of the university as a whole. It's not simply designed around students. So we have security, and in the light of ransomware and organizations going dark, we have done more to focus on security that we have on students and making sure there's an equitable environment for our students. So at the end of the day, if you're really serious about being equitable and creating an environment where both technology advances and students learn from that technology, you have to be intentional. And so, you know, the circuitous routes that we get to go to things does not always guarantee the best route. So, you know, if you look at completion rates for Black and brown students in traditional, predominantly white institutions, are significantly lower than their system that has been designed in predominantly white colleges is designed for predominantly white students. It's not thinking about Black and brown students in an inclusive way. So I would just suggest that as we sit here and struggle with this, and I want to share something. I was at a talk a couple of weeks ago for All Things Open, and a white gentleman, an older white gentleman, stood up and said, "I'm tired of DEI. I'm tired of hearing about it." And I think as a Black person, I'm tired of hearing about it too. And I think it's because the needle moves so slow in DEI, where other things we can move faster in both parts of education, elementary and post-sec. It moves faster when you want to do something than if you don't, right? So, and we know typically education is slow because it's typically governed by the state or some other legislative body that's controlling what they can and cannot do. So I just say, if you really are committed to this, if you're committed to really making an environment where students learn, they enjoy the technology, you provide for them, they understand it, they know what to do, but you have only the beginning of the pandemic to look at how hard attending remote school was for Black and brown people, regardless of their economic structure. It was hard to do. And so I think that's parcel belongs to the educational institutions why this happened, because you weren't really thinking about it. And then to further that point, many of the faculty who were not Black and brown had the same trouble. And I think it's because we haven't really done a good job of planning for the transition to a different environment, but also make it an environment that's adaptable. We have fixed environments, right? You can only do these things. So I want to give Carl back some time so he can ask questions and answer questions. But I want to leave you with this. Black and brown people struggle in every environment that there is, whether it's education, social, whatever it is, they struggle. And primarily it's because we don't think about them in the same way we think about others. So for institutions that are high on the elite scale, you know, I would say you have a magnet in what Harvard has done. Harvard has done some amazing efforts to make their university more inclusive. More universities should do that. I know that costs money, but you can do this. Carl, I'm giving it back to your time.
Dr. Newton, thank you for that. Even though it was just a few minutes, very profound. Every time I talk with you, I learned something new, as I have from our other panelists. So I appreciate that contribution. And I think, Dr. Newton, we need to follow up and probably have a broader discussion on that, because I think there's a lot of interest in this area. And I appreciate the time that all our panelists took to participate in this. I know that Dr. Newton was not available, but she rose above and beyond to make sure she was here today to participate in this important discussion. So I appreciate everyone's time. I did want to quickly give you information, because folks had questions about Scott's contribution about DICE And, we will send this out in an email. We also have a number of unanswered questions that we're going to answer with our panelists. We'll get them to weigh in on we have a number of questions, but DICE is Diversity, Inclusion, and Cultural Engagement at Oregon Institute of Technology. And so, Scott, thank you for sharing that link. We will get this out to all our attendees so they can take a look at that. And perhaps we'll have a part 2 of this DEI discussion, because there just wasn't enough time in an hour. But I certainly do appreciate the participation from our attendees, and I appreciate the input experience from our panelists. Just completely different perspectives on the same topic, which I think gets us thinking about this subject, and we really need to attend to it. And as Dr. Newton had said, and I agree, we can quickly solve other problems, especially in IT. You throw something at us and we come up with some solution very quickly. Why haven't we kind of done this in the area of DEI? So we'll have more discussion about this in the future. Love to hear our attendees' feedback about this if you do want to follow up on this discussion, and happy to work with everybody. If they reach out to us, we'll make connections or provide input, feedback, and support. Thanks everyone for attending today, and thank you so much to our panelists, all 3 of you that attended today. I'm sure there'll be more to follow up after this, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, great rest of the week.